Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're going to do something that might feel a little bit uncomfortable for some.
Just a little.
We're going to take a document that we all see as, the absolute bedrock of American life, the Constitution, and we're going to try to strip away some of the mythology around it.
Right.
We're going to stop looking at that famous painting of the signing in Philadelphia with the light shining down and start looking at the actual blueprints, the blueprints of the machine.
No fireworks, no bald eagles, no soaring music.
None of that.
Just the mechanics.
Okay.
The cold, hard, structural mechanics.
Exactly. And I think that's a necessary exercise because, let's be honest, we usually talk about the Constitution like it's a person or maybe a deity.
Or superhero is one I always hear.
A superhero. That's a perfect way to put it. We use these active verbs. We say, the Constitution protects our rights, or the Constitution forbids the government from doing that.
As if it's a living guardian, hovering over the country with a shield, actively batting away threats. It implies agency.
It does, and it's a very, very comforting way to think about it. It gives you this sense of safety, that as long as that piece of parchment is safe in the National Archives, we're okay.
It's a security blanket. But the analysis we're diving into today argues that this view isn't just a little romantic, it's fundamentally, structurally wrong.
And believing it might actually be dangerous?
It might be, because it can blind us to what's really happening with the mechanics of power.
So let's bring in our source material here. We're drawing heavily from a really fascinating series of essays called The Constitutional Inversion. They're by Lev Nemotin, a PhD, who runs a channel called Uncompressed Thinking.
And his whole approach, which is important to state up front, is what he calls structuralism. He is not interested in Republican versus Democrat or the latest cable news outrage.
Oh, not at all?
He looks at the geometry of power. He asks about scale, about incentives, about the physics of a system. And his central argument, the thesis of this whole thing, is that the American system has undergone a complete inversion.
An inversion.
The whole machine is basically flipped upside down. And, he argues, most of us haven't even noticed because we're still looking at the original blueprints from 1789 and thinking that's how it's built today.
Okay, let's define that term before we go any further. The inversion. When you say the machine flipped, what specifically is flipping? What's on top now that used to be on the bottom?
To really see the flip, you have to visualize the system as a triangle. It's a simple image, but it's powerful. You have three entities, 3 points.
Okay.
Point 1 at the top is the people. That's the theoretical source of all legitimacy in the system.
The people.
We, the people. Point 2 is the government. That's the machinery of administration, the apparatus of coercion, the part that runs things and collects taxes.
And the third point.
The third point is the Constitution itself. It's the thing that sits between the other two.
So it's the interface.
It is the interface. Right. It's the protocol. You can think of it as the user agreement that's supposed to dictate how power flows from the people to the government and, crucially, how it's restrained. It's the rules of engagement.
Okay, so we have the 3 points. People, government, Constitution. Where's the inversion?
Here it is. At the founding, in 1789, the government was on defense. The people were on offense. The Constitution was a leash, a very tight leash, that the people put on the government.
And today...
Today, Nemotin argues, the roles have completely swapped. The government is on offense. The people are on defense.
Wow.
And the Constitution, that interface, has shifted from being a shield or a barrier into what he calls a legitimizing membrane.
A legitimizing membrane, that's a haunting phrase.
It is. It implies that the Constitution is still there. It hasn't been shredded or burned, but its function is totally different. It's not blocking power anymore.
It's filtering it. It's providing a justification for it.
Or even stabilizing the very power it was designed to restrict. It gives the actions of the state the appearance of legitimacy. But look, this isn't a rant. We're not here to scream tyranny or tell you to build a bunker.
No, this is an engineering assessment.
Exactly. And to understand it, we need to walk through the history of how the physics of this system changed. Because it wasn't one event. It wasn't a coup. It was a slow drift, a gradual change in geometry over 2 centuries.
So let's do that. Let's go back to the starting line, the founding equilibrium, 1789. I think most of us today have a really hard time picturing what the federal government actually looked like back then.
Oh, absolutely.
We project our current reality backwards. We imagine Washington, D.C. as it is now. Massive stone buildings, sprawling agencies, motorcades. We just mentally replace the cars with horses.
And the suits with wigs.
Right, but that's not it at all, is it?
Not even close.
Yeah.
To understand the original equilibrium, you have to understand one thing above all else. weakness.
Yeah.
The federal government in 1789 was an idea. It was an experiment,
A fragile one?
a deeply fragile one. It was brand new, it was broke,
Yeah.
and it was, frankly, terrified.
Terrified of what, specifically?
Terrified of failure, terrified of the states just shrugging and walking away, terrified of being ignored. And most importantly, it was terrified of the people. Because you have to remember what the government actually was. There was no standing army of any significance. There was no FBI, no CIA, no Department of Homeland Security, no IRS with thousands of agents.
Well, it was no federal police force at all.
Not in any meaningful sense. The government was basically a piece of parchment and a handful of guys in a room in Philadelphia, and later New York, trying to hold together this loose coalition of 13 very independent, very skeptical states full of farmers.
Farmers who, I imagine, hated paying taxes and were deeply, deeply suspicious of any centralized authority.
That was their default setting. And those farmers, the people of 1789, were a completely different entity than we are today.
How so?
Nemotin points this out very clearly. The people back then were a physical power. They were not just an abstract concept of voters. They had actual kinetic power.
So they were organized locally.
Very organized locally, through militias and town halls. They were economically independent for the most part. If you're a subsistence farmer, you don't really need the federal government for your paycheck or your health care or your food.
You can just ignore them.
You can effectively ignore them. Their life doesn't change much. And the most crucial part, they were armed. The technological gap between a citizen and a soldier was tiny.
So the balance of raw physical power actually favored the citizenry. The government couldn't just impose its will by force.
Heavily. The asymmetry favored the people.
Yeah.
If the government pushed too hard, the people could and would physically push back. We saw that almost immediately with things like the Whiskey Rebellion. The government had to seriously struggle to even raise an army to go and try to collect its taxes. It wasn't a given that the government would win a physical confrontation.
So in that context, with a weak government and a strong populace, the Constitution is what?
It's a restraining order. It's a list of things the government absolutely cannot do because the people won't let it.
This gets to a point about the Bill of Rights that I think is so often misunderstood. We have this children's book version of history, the Schoolhouse Rock version, where the founding fathers were these benevolent geniuses who just benevolently gifted us our rights. They sat down and said, "Here you go, have some free speech. You can have a trial by jury. We are so generous."
That's the fairy tale. It's a nice story, but the reality is so much grittier and, frankly, more interesting. The Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, wasn't even in the original draft of the Constitution.
Which is wild to think about. Madison and Hamilton, the main architects, they didn't even want it in there.
They actively argued against it.
Why? I mean, did they have something against rights?
No, not at all. Their argument was a structural one. It was very logical in a way. They said, look, the Constitution only gives the federal government a specific, limited list of powers. We didn't give it the power to regulate speech, so why on earth do we need an amendment saying it can't?
Their fear was that if you start listing rights that are protected...
You imply that the government has power over everything except what's on that list? It was a fear of creating power by omission.
That makes a kind of cold, logical sense. But the other side, the anti-federalists, the skeptics of this new government, they didn't buy it for a second.
They smelled a rat. They looked at all of human history and said, power always expands. It never stays in its box. If you don't write the limits down explicitly, they will eventually take everything.
So they basically held the entire Constitution hostage.
That's exactly what they did.
Yeah.
Several key states said, we will not ratify this document. We will not grant you this legitimacy unless you immediately add a list of things you are forbidden from ever touching.
So the Bill of Rights wasn't a gift from the government to the people.
It was a demand from the people of the government. It was a ransom note.
A condition of the lease.
A condition of the lease. You can have this limited power to govern, but you can't touch these 10 things, period.
And that just perfectly proves the defense versus offense theory. The people had the leverage. They were on offense. They dictated the terms. The government was the puppy, and the people were the owner holding the leash.
That's a perfect metaphor. That was the geometry of 1789. Government on defense, desperate to prove it was worthy of existing. People on offense, granting very limited, very specific permissions.
No way. How did we lose the leash? Because when I look around today, the dynamic is obviously the complete opposite. The government doesn't seem terrified of us. It seems to be managing us.
managing us. And according to Nemotin's analysis, there were two major inflection points in American history where the geometry fundamentally changed. The first one is a big one, the Civil War and the period of Reconstruction that followed.
And specifically, one changed the Constitution itself.
Specifically, the 14th Amendment, ratified in 1868.
Okay, now, we have to be really careful here because the 14th Amendment is, from a moral standpoint, objectively a good and necessary thing. It ended the legal monstrosity of slavery. It guaranteed equal protection under the law. It made us a real nation where citizenship meant something for everyone.
Morally, yes, absolutely vital. It was the moment America finally started to live up to its own creed. But again, we're not looking at morality right now. We are looking at structure. We are looking at the mechanics of power.
So what was the mechanical change?
Before the 14th Amendment, the Bill of Rights only applied to the federal government. It was a leash on Congress. The First Amendment literally starts with, Congress shall make no law. It didn't say the state of Massachusetts shall make no law.
Right. So if your state government wanted to ban a certain religion or shut down a newspaper it didn't like, strictly speaking, the U.S. Constitution didn't stop them. You had to hope your state constitution offered some protection.
Exactly. The federal leash didn't extend to the states. The 14th Amendment changed all of that. Through a legal doctrine called incorporation, it effectively said that the fundamental rights in the Bill of Rights now apply to the states as well. It says no state shall deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law.
And on the surface, that sounds great. It protects individuals from their own local governments. It protects minority groups from being oppressed by local majorities.
It is great for protecting individual rights. But think about the machine you have to build to enforce that. Think about the mechanical requirement.
Okay.
If the federal government in Washington, D.C. is going to protect you, a citizen in Alabama, from your state legislature or from your local sheriff or even from your neighbor, what does that imply?
It implies the federal government has to be more powerful than all of them.
It has to be the supreme power. To be the ultimate protector, you have to be the superior force.
I see. So the very nature of rights shifted. It went from being leave me alone, a negative liberty, to guarantee this for me, a positive enforcement.
And to guarantee rights across an entire continent, you need a massive centralized apparatus. You need federal courts with the power to overrule local judges. You need federal agents who can go into a state and enforce those rulings, whether the local government likes it or not. You need the idea of national supremacy to become a physical, tangible reality.
So the paradox is that in order to secure liberty for millions of freed slaves and other citizens, we had to build the engine of a much, much stronger central state.
And that power, as Nemotin puts it, once grown, does not shrink voluntarily.
Yeah.
Once the federal government became the final referee of justice, it needed the muscle to stop the game anytime it wanted. This was the moment the federal government stopped being a loose coordinator of states and started becoming the supreme authority over the states. The geometry flipped.
But even then, right, even in, say, 1890, the government was still relatively small compared to what we see today. It had the legal authority, but it didn't have the resources to be everywhere all the time.
That's a great point. It was strong in theory, but still limited in practice. Which brings us to the second major inflection point, the moment the government got infinite fuel.
The 20th century.
The 20th century, and specifically one very boring-sounding amendment, the 16th Amendment.
The income tax.
The income tax, ratified in 1913. This is the one everyone's eyes glaze over for because it just sounds like accounting. But structurally, Nemotin argues this might be the single most important amendment after the original Bill of Rights.
Why? What was the fuel source before this?
Before 1913, the federal government ran almost entirely on tariff taxes on imported goods and some excise taxes.
Which puts a natural limit on your budget. There's only so much stuff you can import. There's a hard cap on how much revenue you can possibly generate that way.
A very hard cap. It put the government on a permanent budget diet. They couldn't afford a massive permanent standing army. They couldn't afford a giant welfare state. They couldn't afford a sprawling regulatory empire because the money simply wasn't there. If they wanted to do something huge, like fight a major war, they had to ask the states for money or go deep into debt and hope to pay it back. They were fiscally constrained.
The 16th Amendment took them off that diet for good.
It didn't just take them off the diet. It gave them an all-you-can-eat buffet that never closes. By being able to tax income directly, the government tapped into the entire productive capacity of the American economy.
So as the economy grew, government revenue would just grow automatically.
Automatically. It turned the dial from finite to infinitely scalable. If
Wow.
they want a new war, just raise the tax rate a little. If they want to create a whole new bureaucracy, just adjust the brackets. This single change is what allowed for the creation of what Moten calls the permanent state.
And this is the dawn of the administrative century.
This is it. This is when we went from a government that, for most people, existed on paper and at the local post office to a government that exists in every single aspect of modern life.
We build the military-industrial complex,
Yeah.
which, unlike past armies, never gets dismantled.
It never sleeps. We build the vast intelligence community, the CIA, the NSA. We build the great regulatory agencies, the EPA, the FDA, the SEC, the Department of Education. And these aren't temporary bodies. They are permanent management structures.
And crucially, they're not directly elected.
Not at all. They are staffed by permanent bureaucrats. And this is where the inversion really solidifies. The government is no longer that fragile, terrified experiment from 1789. It is a juggernaut. It has the legal supremacy from the 14th Amendment and the infinite fuel from the 16th.
And what about the other side of the equation? The people.
The people have also transformed. We are no longer those independent agrarian farmers. We are, for the most part, managed. We are plugged into complex systems, aging, healthcare, the internet, utilities, that the government either directly funds, heavily regulates, or both.
We can't just walk away anymore.
There is no walking away. If you get debanked, or if your access to the digital grid is cut off, you cease to function in modern society. Your survival depends on access to these systems.
So let's look at the triangle one more time. The government is now permanently on offense. It's managing, regulating, taxing, surveilling constantly. And the people are now permanently on defense, trying to navigate the rules, trying not to get audited, just trying to stay compliant.
The triangle has flipped. The leash is gone. The geometry is inverted.
To really drive his point home, Moten uses a case study in his essay that is,
Yeah.
well, it's always controversial to bring up.
It is.
But he argues it's the clearest example of this structural shift in action, the Second Amendment.
And we really need to put a big disclaimer here, a bright flashing light. We are not having a debate about gun control policy.
Not at all.
We're not asking if guns are good or bad. We're not asking if we should ban certain types of rifles. This is a purely structural question. Does the amendment still function as it was originally intended to? Does it still act as a check on tyranny?
So the original logic in 1789 was crystal clear. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The idea was, if the new federal government ever went rogue and became tyrannical, the people, organized in their militias, would have the physical means to resist, to say no.
Right. Back then, the technological gap between a citizen with his musket and a government soldier with his musket was negligible. It was essentially the same weapon. A local militia could genuinely stand up to and threaten a tyrannical governor's forces. It was a valid, real-world counterweight. The government had to listen because the people had teeth.
Okay, but Moten argues that today the Second Amendment is structurally inert. He basically says it's dead, even though the text is still there and fiercely debated. Why? I mean, Americans own hundreds of millions of firearms. That sounds like a lot of teeth.
It is a lot of teeth, but he argues they're biting the wrong thing. The nature of power has shifted. It's moved from being a game of quantity to a game of quality. It's not about how many rifles you have versus how many the government has. It's about the entire domain of conflict.
There was a line in the essay that really just stopped me in my tracks. You cannot shoot an algorithm.
That's the whole thesis right there. That's the key insight. If the modern state wants to suppress a rebellion or a dissident movement today, they don't necessarily have to send in tanks and soldiers. They don't have to fire a single shot.
They control the invisible terrain.
They control the invisible terrain, logistics, finance, and information.
Okay, walk me through a concrete scenario. How does that actually play out in the 21st century?
All right, imagine a hypothetical group of rebels wants to physically oppose the federal government today. Before they even manage to get their trucks loaded with supplies, what happens?
Their bank accounts are frozen.
Instantly frozen. Their credit cards stop working. Their cell phones, which they've been using to coordinate, are not only shut off, but have also been broadcasting their locations to an intelligence agency for weeks. Their digital communications are jammed or filtered, their car insurance is canceled, their online fundraising platform is shut down.
They're neutralized administratively before they can ever be neutralized physically.
Exactly. The old musket versus musket math is completely irrelevant because the real battlefield isn't physical anymore. It's digital, it's financial, it's informational. The state has moved to a higher plane of warfare where a rifle is about as useful as a catapult.
And this leads to I'd say, a very dark conclusion in the analysis. Neymotin suggests that the government, the modern state, tolerates the Second Amendment precisely because it knows it no longer matters as a real check.
That's an incredibly cynical take, I know. But the logic is powerful.
You're saying they let people keep the guns because they know the guns are just toys compared to the real levers of power they control?
He's arguing it's become a symbolic constraint. He cites a principle of power. When an institution becomes too powerful to be checked, it can afford to tolerate symbolic constraints.
So the Second Amendment has become a cultural totem.
It has. We fight about it. We vote based on it. It makes a certain part of the population feel like they're still free citizens in that 1789 sense. But as a practical mechanism to actually overthrow a tyrannical 21st century state, he says it's functionally obsolete.
So the text of the amendment survives, but the function, the actual check on power, is dead.
And that is the absolute definition of the constitutional inversion. And once you see that pattern, that template, you start to see it everywhere. It applies to the other amendments, too.
Okay, let's test that theory. What about the big one, the First Amendment? Free speech. We still have that, right? I can go out on a street corner and shout whatever I want and not get arrested.
You can.
Yeah.
Absolutely can. But does it reach anyone? Does it have an impact? The original context of the First Amendment was about preventing the state from doing very physical things. Smashing your printing press or throwing you in jail for seditious libel. It was about preventing direct, overt censorship by the government.
And today,
Yeah.
the printing press is Twitter or Facebook or YouTube.
Exactly. Today, the state doesn't need to smash the press. Speech is mediated by a handful of massive private technological systems that are, let's say, very much aligned with state power.
We're talking about institutional gating, algorithmic shadowing.
Shadow banning, deplatforming, demonetization. The government doesn't have to pass a law that says you can't say that. They just have a quiet conversation with the private platforms.
That's a nice social network you have there. It would be a real shame if we had to regulate it into oblivion.
Precisely. It's censorship by proxy. And structurally, the First Amendment has a very hard time grappling with that. The text says, Congress shall make no law. It doesn't say a private company's algorithm shall not downrank your content into invisibility.
So again, the text is legally intact. Congress didn't make a law. But the function of an open, robust marketplace of ideas is seriously eroded. The inversion holds.
It holds.
What about the Fourth Amendment? The protection against unreasonable searches and seizures.
I'd supply the template.
What?
Original context, physical things, doors, drawers, personal papers. The founders were worried about British redcoats kicking down your door to search your house for smuggled tea or unstamped documents.
The modern context is the supercomputer I carry in my pocket.
Right. We voluntarily carry a tracking device with us everywhere we go. We voluntarily upload our most private thoughts, photos, and conversations to servers owned by massive third-party corporations, Google, Apple, Meta.
So the search isn't a physical event anymore. It's a constant, passive process of data collection.
It's happening 204/7 via algorithms sifting through the digital exhaust we all emit. The Fourth Amendment protects your house, but you don't really live in your house anymore, digitally speaking. You live in the cloud. And the Constitution has almost no idea how to protect you in the cloud.
It's the same pattern. The government doesn't need to kick down the door to know what you're thinking or who you're talking to. They just buy the data from a data broker. Or they issue a subpoena to that third party.
And the courts have generally said that's okay, because you gave your data to the third party. You surrendered your expectation of privacy.
And then there's the 10th Amendment. This was supposed to be the Great Wall, right? The powers not delegated to the United States are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. This was meant to be the ultimate barrier against federal overreach.
It feels like that one's been dead for a very long time.
How was it killed?
It was killed by money. It goes right back to the 16th Amendment and what Neymotin calls fiscal dominance.
Okay.
When the federal government sucks up all that income tax revenue from the entire country, it turns around and offers it back to the states, but with strings attached.
This is the, do you want federal highway funds? Then you have to raise your drinking age to 21.
That's the classic example. Do you want this education grant? Then you have to adopt this national curriculum. Do you want health care funding? Then you have to implement these specific policies.
So if a state tries to exercise its sovereignty and say no,
the feds just turn off the money spigot. And since the states are now completely addicted to that federal money to balance their own budgets, they almost always cave. They become, in effect, administrative contractors for the central government. They're just implementing federal policy at the local level,
Authority follows the money.
always.
So if we put all of this together, this idea of the text surviving while the function dies, the inversion means the Constitution is now acting as a kind of wrapper.
That's the metaphor he uses, and I think it's a good one. Think of a candy bar wrapper.
Mm-hmm.
It still has the same branding, the same colors. It looks like the thing it's always been. It holds the shape. But the ingredients inside have completely changed.
The government uses the Constitution as a stabilizer. It gives the whole system the feeling of legitimacy. It makes us feel good, like we're still living in that same republic. It's the skin holding the organism together.
The legitimizing membrane.
There's that phrase again.
It filters the relationship between the state and the citizen. It makes us feel like we live in a constitutional republic, while the administrative state increasingly operates like a managerial oligarchy. It's not that the Constitution has been burned, it's that it's been bypassed. Or maybe even worse, it's been absorbed. It's now part of the management software.
Okay, I think we have successfully and thoroughly depressed everyone listening.
That wasn't the goal, but it might be a side effect.
We've established the thesis, the shield has become a membrane, the leash is gone, the inversion is real. So, is there a way out? Or is this just the inevitable heat death of the republic we're describing?
Moten devotes the final part of his analysis to this exact question, the idea of restoration. And he starts with a very hard truth, he says. No nostalgia.
Meaning, we can't just turn the clock back to 1789.
We can't. And it's foolish to pretend we can. That world is gone forever. We are a nation of 330 million people with nuclear weapons, a globalized economy, and incredibly complex supply chains. You cannot run 21st century America with 18th century logistics. We need a capable state. The question isn't state or no state. The question is, can we build a state that is powerful enough to function, but structured in a way that it could actually be checked by the people?
So what are the solutions? What does uncompressed thinking propose for a path back? Because he doesn't just leave us in despair, right?
No, he lays out 5 pillars for what restoration might look like. And let's be clear, none of them are easy. They're all heavy lifts, they are technical, and they require immense political willpower. The first one is radical decentralization.
That's a buzzword we hear a lot. What does it actually mean in this structural context?
It means breaking the one center determines all model. Right now, a decision made by a regulatory agency in Washington, D.C. can be instantly applied to 330 million people from Maine to Hawaii. That is a massive single point of failure. If the center gets it wrong, everyone suffers the consequences.
So this is about devolving real power back to states and even more locally to cities and communities.
Yes, and not just for some abstract idea of liberty, but for basic resilience, for anti-fragility. If California wants to try one crazy policy and Florida wants to try a different crazy policy, let them be laboratories. We need to unclunk the power. We need redundancy in the system so that a mistake in D.C. doesn't wreck a school in Idaho or a business in Texas.
But that would require the federal government to voluntarily give up power and money, which, as we've established, it never does.
Which is why the people would have to demand it. Which leads to pillar number 2, real separation of powers. We have to end what he calls the fused system.
This goes back to the administrative state we were talking about before.
Exactly. Think about an agency like the ATF or the EPA. They write a new rule, which is effectively a law. That's a legislative power. Then their agents go out and enforce that rule. That's an executive power. And then they often have their own internal courts that judge you and fine you for breaking the rule. That's a judicial power.
That's the definition of tyranny the founders were worried about. All 3, powers legislative, executive, judicial fused into one hand. The judge, jury, and executioner problem.
Precisely. Restoration means forcing Congress to actually do its job again, to legislate. Stop passing these vague 1,000-page laws that just say the secretary shall create a program to do good things and then letting unelected bureaucrats fill in all the details for the next 30 years. If you want a law, you vote on it. You put your name on it. You become accountable to the voters for it.
That seems incredibly difficult because Congress loves avoiding responsibility. It's so much easier to just blame the agency and the rule they created goes wrong.
It's the politically easy path, but it's structurally catastrophic. If the people making the laws that govern your life are people you cannot vote out of office, you don't live in a representative republic anymore. It's that simple.
Okay, what's pillar 3? This one sounds like it's straight out of the 21st century.
It is visible surveillance, or creating a digital Bill of Rights.
So we have to accept that the state has the technology to watch us.
We can't uninvent the internet or mass data collection. The genie is out of the bottle. But what we can do is constitutionalize the visibility of that watching. The state cannot be restrained if its primary and most powerful tool mass surveillance is invisible and operates in secret.
So we need to know what they know about us.
We need to establish a principle of due process for data. We need to put hard constitutional barriers on algorithmic governance. If the government uses an algorithm to flag you as a potential threat, or to select you for an audit, or to put you on a no-fly list, you must have the constitutional right to see the code, to know the criteria, and to challenge the flag in a real court. It cannot be a secret black box. In the digital age, transparency is the only check on power.
Pillar 4. This one feels less legal and more cultural.
It's the hardest one, I think. Civic cohesion. The logic here is simple. The people cannot act as a counterweight to state power if they are busy fighting a bitter civil war against each other.
This goes back to the people being stuck on defense. If we're fighting each other, we can't unite to push back against the government.
We're fragmented.
Yeah.
We're atomized. And if I hate my neighbor more than I fear the state, what will I do? I will try to weaponize the state against my neighbor. I will beg the government, please silence him, censor his speech, take away his rights. He's a threat to everything I believe in.
And the government is more than happy to oblige. Divide and conquer is the oldest play in the book.
It loves that. Because every time we ask the state to intervene against our domestic enemies, we are feeding it more power. We are handing it the tools for our own subjugation. As long as we are this divided, the inversion stays locked in place. To flip it back, we have to somehow lower the temperature. We have to rediscover a sense of the people that is bigger and more important than our partisan tribes. We have to stop inviting the vampire into the house just so it will bite our political opponents first.
And that leads to the final pillar, which is related: constitutional fitness.
This is about developing a culture that values limits more than it values political victories. And this is the deep civilizational question at the heart of it all. Can we as a people get to a place where we applaud when our side loses a court case simply because the Constitution as a document of limits was upheld?
That is the ultimate test, isn't it? It's easy to love the Constitution when it's protecting your speech or your rights.
It's when it protects the speech of someone you despise that the principle is actually tested. If you only love the Constitution when it helps your team win, you don't actually love the Constitution, you just love power. Constitutional fitness means being willing to say, I hate that policy, I find that speech repulsive, I think that outcome is terrible for the country, but the government is not allowed to stop it, and I accept that limit on power, even when it hurts me.
So, to recap the roadmap: decentralize power, separate the fused powers of the administrative state, make surveillance visible, rebuild civic community, and develop a culture that values limits.
That's the map. The question is whether we as a country have the legs or the will to walk that path.
And that brings us right to the conclusion of the analysis: hope versus doubt. Where does Moten ultimately land on this?
He's deeply conflicted, and he says so. His hope is conceptual. He says, technically, this is all possible. It's not magic. It's an engineering problem. We designed the first version of this machine. We can design an upgraded, more resilient version. The logic of the solutions holds up.
That's the hope. What's the doubt?
The doubt is human. It's us. Restoration requires restraint. It requires giving up conveniences. It requires politicians to voluntarily surrender power, which they almost never do. It requires citizens to stop demanding more services and benefits from the government in exchange for their liberty.
It requires a level of maturity that might be in short supply.
It does. And he poses this really haunting question. Have we been trained over the last century to be clients rather than citizens?
Break that down for me. What is the difference between a client and a citizen?
A client wants service. Fix my road, pay my medical bills, make me feel safe, educate my kids, give me a check. A client's only real political action is to complain to the manager when the service is bad.
And a citizen?
A citizen accepts responsibility. A citizen understands that liberty comes with costs and risks. A citizen is willing to solve problems at the local level without asking the central government to step in. A citizen values their autonomy more than their comfort.
And if we are, in fact, now a nation of clients, we will never restore the Constitution. We'll just keep negotiating for better service from our managers in Washington.
That's the fear. And if we don't restore it, what happens? Does it all just collapse? Is there a big, dramatic dictatorship?
What does he predict?
That's the most chilling part of the whole thing.
Yeah.
He says, no, it's not a dramatic movie ending with tanks in the streets. He calls it the quiet end.
They'd outgrow.
We just outgrow it. We have a legal continuity, but a structural surrender. The Constitution as a document remains.
Yeah.
We still quote it on the floor of Congress. We still have a 4th of July parade. The marble buildings in D.C. still look the same.
Where?
But its function changes completely. It goes from being a shield that protects the people to being a management procedure for the state.
It becomes a heritage site, a tourist attraction.
A beautiful museum piece that we all happen to live inside. We applaud it, we revere it, we teach our kids about it, but it no longer actually protects us from power. It just legitimizes the people who wield that power over us. It becomes a zombie document. It's dead on the inside, but it's still walking around.
That is a thought that will linger with me for a while.
The final line of the analysis is, the danger isn't that the Constitution disappears, but that it becomes irrelevant while we are still applauding it.
That is a lot to process, and it completely changes how you look at the daily news. Every time a new law is passed or a new regulation is written, you have to ask yourself, is this reinforcing the membrane? Is this deepening the inversion?
But awareness is the first step. It's the precursor to any possible correction. You can't fix the machine if you don't even know how it's currently working. And hopefully this framework helps people see the gears turning a little more clearly.
A huge thank you to Levne Moten and his channel Uncompressed Thinking for providing this incredible framework. It has definitely uncompressed my thinking today.
Absolutely. It's well worth your time to go check out his work directly.
That's it for this deep dive. As you go about your week, maybe check your own posture. Are you on offense or on defense? We'll see you next time.